Alright YouTubers, I'm going to do a little review video for you today. There isn't much on the net in regards to Howa aftermarket triggers. This is a Howa model 1500 action barreled in a 6.5 Creedmoor that I've mounted up to an MDT LSS XL chassis here. The stock trigger on these things, which is this trigger right here, is obviously pretty atrocious if you're really into precision rifle shooting. And not that I'm an expert by any means, but I do appreciate a good trigger, and that is not, in my opinion, a great trigger. I mean, it's not a bad trigger. It certainly has a niche, but I think it adjusts down to about maybe 3 pounds. I've heard some reports on the net that you could get these things down to 2.5 pounds. I didn't even mess with it, to be honest with you. It was set at about 7 when I got it, and so what I went with was one of the jarred triggers here, which I'm going to show you here in just a moment, that's already mounted up in the rifle. And I wanted to give you kind of a quick installation video, a review of the trigger itself, and then some modifications that I had to do to the trigger to really make it shine. So I'm going to stand by for just a second. I'm going to set the camera down over here while I pull that action out of the chassis and show you what we got going on here. I've bedded this chassis so it's a little tight, but tight in a good way. There's no stress on the action here. Just trying to gently pop it out of there. And let's pull the bolt out so that you guys can get a better look at what we're looking at here. Alright, so let's see, I might turn on some other lights here just to give us a little extra. What we're looking at here, so this is the jarred trigger, and it's stupid easy to install on these Howa actions. Literally, it is it's just insanely easy. So the first thing I want to show you, I've actually got the bolt catch removed here from this particular setup. Sorry about the noise here, because I've been modifying this morning. But here's the bolt catch, and the bolt catch actually slides right up in here like so. And there's a little, gets the focus here, there's a little tiny spring that goes in right here where you can see the screwdriver, little tiny spring that goes in there. But essentially, in order to change out from the factory trigger, there's this little screw right here that you can see, and it's literally just a normal flathead screw. And you pull that out. You want to make sure that you're holding this down when you pull that screw out so that the spring doesn't jump out at you. And then slowly just kind of pull this out, and you'll be able to pull that spring out, and it's not going to explode on you. And then once that's out, you'll see right here there's just a normal Allen wrench bolt head. You just loosen that up. Oh, my camera's not focusing very well today. Loosen that up, and you can remove the factory trigger. It literally just lifts out of there. There's no other jumping parts or anything like that. So once you've got that out, you can replace it with the jarred trigger. This is the 12-ounce model that I ordered for them. I think it was $139 maybe, which, you know, for an aftermarket trigger, that's not bad. That's pretty reasonable for one that literally just drops in. On the other side of the trigger here, I'm going to show you the safety mechanism. And this is what I had to actually modify for this particular trigger. So on top here, there's 2 adjustment screws. There's one here and one here. This one adjusts kind of the over travel, the trigger over travel, and then this one adjusts the sear engagement trigger, or sear engagement on the trigger. And there's pretty good instructions on how to adjust this. So essentially, you kind of back this one all the way out, and while squeezing the trigger, then you tighten it in until the trigger fires, and that adjusts your over travel. And then this one here engages the sear engagement like I was talking about earlier. And what's interesting about this particular setup is that right here you'll notice this notch in the trigger housing. That is what the safety is, and that's actually part of the sear engagement, that little bolt that sticks through there. And so for the trigger to function, or for the safety to function, excuse me, you have to flip this in that position, and now the safety's on, right? Okay. So one thing that I didn't like about this trigger was that once I got it all set up to where it was, there was minimal travel, the sear was engaging properly, and literally there was no creep in the trigger itself. Then I couldn't engage the safety. It was this little notch right here was just not quite deep enough for me to allow me to engage the safety, while the trigger was in the position that I preferred it to be in, which meant that there was zero creep in this trigger. Now I could back out this sear engagement screw and this would function properly, but there was literally about 2 thou of movement of creep in this trigger before you could, before it would break the sear. So to me, it's just terribly annoying. Absolutely just drove me bonkers. And I haven't even shot this rifle, you should know. But obviously, just sitting here in the shop, once I installed the trigger, I'm very particular about my triggers. The creep just drove me bonkers. Like I said, there was a couple of thou worth of creep where I would start to apply trigger pressure before that trigger would break. Now, again, I could adjust this top sear adjustment screw to the point at which there was no creep in the trigger whatsoever, and it was just a beautifully crisp break. But then, at that point, the safety was no longer functional. I couldn't use the safety at all. So what I did was very simple. I'll flip it back over here. You'll see right here that there's a, get it to focus here again, sorry. Little C-clip there. Pop that C-clip. Just use a normal little flathead screwdriver, and you pop that one, and then you pop this little C-clip right there, and essentially this whole thing slides out. Now you'll see right there, there's a little ball bearing right there with a spring behind it, and that's what, there's 2 holes there, that's kind of what clicks and makes holds the safety in place and gives you that nice affirmative on-off safety. So once I pulled those 2 C-clips, you can actually pull these little pins out. There's nothing else in there. I was kind of concerned. There is a spring, you'll see behind that one there, but it doesn't jump out, and I'm not even sure it's actually a spring. It might be a bolt, I'm not sure, but it didn't come out. I was able to, and actually I take that back. I didn't even pull that one out at all. I just left that one in. I just pulled this front one. And so it's possible that that one could come out under spring tension, but you don't need to remove it, so just leave it in there because you're just going to lift this piece out anyway. Obviously, be careful not to lose the ball bearing in the spring there. It is spring loaded. So you pull this out, and essentially what I did is I took I mounted that in my bench vise, and I took my Dremel here, and I've got this little bit for my Dremel. I'll show you to this real quick, and it's just a little tiny carbide tip for my Dremel. Mounted this up in my bench vise, and I literally get in real close here if I can, if it'll focus as good as it can. I literally just made this little notch right in here, just a little deeper, and kind of, you can see how I kind of half moon shaped it a little bit. Just made it a little bit deeper so that when I got the sear engagement right where I wanted it, it now clicks on and it locks in, and there's actually just a little bit of a half moon there that gives it a nice resting place over that whatever you want to call that that pin in there, that sear engagement pin. And now there's zero travel in the trigger, and I'll show you here in just a second. So hold on, let me put the bolt in and we will show you. Alright, I'll see if I can do this two-handed. Get this thing to focus here. There we go. Like I said, this is set supposedly at about 12 ounces. I haven't checked it yet. But there's zero creep, and it is nice and perfectly crisp. So overall, for $130, this jarred trigger for the Howa Action is an amazing value. Once you get it set up right, and it's stupid easy to set up, it's stupid easy to install, it's a drop-in trigger. It's not like the Remingtons where you got to pound out the pins and remount the holes. And, anybody can do this at home, literally with an Allen wrench and a flathead screwdriver. You can drop out in that trigger. Now, you can also install the trigger and do just fine without the modification that I made, and it'll work just fine. There will be just a little bit of creep in the trigger, but it's pretty minimal, and most people probably wouldn't even notice it, to be honest with you. I'm insanely picky when it comes to my trigger. I usually run jewels in all of my Remington bolt guns. You know, Timney's not a bad trigger either. I prefer the jewel. They're just that much better. But I'll tell you what, for this Howa action and this particular build and this project, it's a budget build. This thing is amazing, and I highly recommend it. So that's the end of the video. If you have any questions, post them in the comments section, and I'll be happy to answer.